Well, hello, everybody. Welcome, all of you, to CorePower Yoga Conversations. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guests today. We've all personally experienced the powerful benefits of heated yoga and have heard so many similar stories from our students. Doctors Maren Nair and Dr. Simi Foster have spent years researching the mental health benefits of heated yoga and some really exciting findings that they're going to share with us today. So welcome, Dr. Foster and Dr. Nair. May I call you Simi and Maren? Great.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so Maren, let's start with you. What was the impetus for this research?
So this research came out of, I was in graduate school getting a PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Virginia. And I actually was doing normal temperature yoga at the gym there through the UVA gym center. And I didn't really like it. And my friend and I would go together and I forced myself to go. And I was like, I'd rather be like running at the gym. I don't really like this. And my friend finally, a different friend, drags me to a hot yoga class in Charlottesville, Virginia. I got really upset the first time because I couldn't do it. It was so hot. And the second time I went back, I started sweating and felt the benefits and I left and I was like, oh my God. And I was kind of hooked. Like I got a week free or whatever it was. And I went like every day that week and started just noticing these benefits that were helping my concentration, my sleep, not be as reactive to stressors. Nothing at school felt like as big of a deal. I would go into presentations and not care as much. And I was like, this is pretty amazing. And I was learning how to do therapy. I was in therapy, learning how to be a therapist. And I was like, I want my clients to be able to do this. So I went into PubMed where we look for evidence that treatments work. And there were like 2 case studies at the time on hot yoga. One was like somebody who was admitted to the ER with a seizure because they were overhydrated. And then somebody, I think, who had a psychotic break due to hot yoga. And those were the 2 case reports in the literature, making it sound super scary. Like, oh God, this is like extreme and scary. That was it. And this was in 2007, 2008.
Wow, that recent.
Yeah. So I came to Mass General, end up like serendipitously getting connected with Simi, both of our mentors. 2 of them have been pioneers in studying complementary treatments for depression. So acupuncture, omega-3s. Basically, I said that when I started a postdoc, asked what I wanted to study. And I was like, I want to study hot yoga for depression. And I'd been going to hot yoga. They donated the blinded raters because we had an infrastructure of psychologists and psychiatrists who were trained up on depression scales. And then the yoga studio donated the yoga and we did our first study that way.
I had a similar reaction to yoga when I first tried it because I was a runner and I was told, it would be good for my running if I went to yoga and, stretched more and I went into yoga and kind of went, I'm not sure this is for me, but I kept at it because I thought, give it a chance. And I started noticing that not only did I definitely need to counter all the running I was doing with some other types of movement, but I started noticing mental benefits. And for me, I've always struggled with focus. My mind bounces around too much. I future trip all the time about, what's going to happen next, what could happen that's bad, what are the possibilities that, could be great, but my imagination runs a little bit wild and I'm constantly struggling to stay present. And I started noticing that yoga was helping me with my mental focus. And so I started really liking yoga more and more. And then I got introduced to Bikram hot yoga. And I did that for a few years. And the indescribable feeling after that heated yoga class, that Bikram class, I don't know what the words are, but it was just an incredible feeling. But I also struggled with some of the other aspects of Bikram. So I found my way out of Bikram, found my way into CorePower Yoga, which is hot yoga in a slightly different model, but still heated yoga. And I think that you're onto something. We hear so much feedback from our students and the combination of the heat and that movement, but that heat really has an impact in how we feel and our emotional state. Can you talk about, for you, like you had, in an earlier conversation, I think it was you, Marin, that shared going through grad school and some of the stress you experienced.
I remember I was in grad school and I was like freaking out about presentations, and the kind of yoga that we've been researching is Bikram yoga, but and that's the kind that I did in grad school, which is like 105. It's the hottest, it's
Right.
hot.
It is.
Um,
It's really hot.
it's hot. And but I would come out of class and then I would go into, say, a presentation or something in grad school, or now Dr. Foster and I are writing a lot of grants, and I'll think these grants are such a big deal, and oh my God, and my mind is so active. And I'll come out of class and I'm like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Right? Like, like we get it. That's great. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to try my best. It kind of just like washes you clean and wrings you out in a way that I don't know of anything else that does that, because you're getting the mindfulness benefits and the concentration, and then you're wringing out your whole body plus the heat's going on. All, it's for me, I'm always saying it's like packing a powerful punch. And I think so. One of my friends who's also did her dissertation on Bikram yoga, and it was women with stress induced eating and high levels of stress. And she did a randomized controlled trial where they either went to Bikram yoga or did a wait list. And she actually brought them into the lab, took blood, and measured their cortisol before and after a stressor in the lab, where it's called the Trier stress test, where you have to give a speech and then the Confederates just have a blank face, and then they get your cortisol before and after. It's very mean, actually.
Wow.
It's,
Interesting.
it's a little bit mean. But the IRB, the human subjects boards approve it. And the people that went to Bikram yoga versus the waitlist control were able to control their cortisol levels in the face of the lab-based stressor.
Yeah.
And you feel that in your daily life. Like, and I think probably everybody on this call, like, I can give a talk and not be as rattled by it. I can have somebody yell at me and I'm kind of like able to calm my body. Just things that used to cause me more stress, my body can regulate it. And I think that Lindsay Hopkins is the one who did that study. I think she captured it with the cortisol. I think your body is just better able to like keep calm in the face of a stressor.
Yeah. Do you think that the heat like helps to just level out that so you don't get those cortisol spikes, or does it prov-
Simi is a psychiatrist, so she went to medical school and has a PhD in immunology.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and she did her dissertation on like the impact, like a fever model in cells. So let me defer to Dr. Foster here. What cortisol? What do you think, Simi? I don't feel like I.
Yeah, I'll put that science training to use. Yeah, I think that so there's this concept in biology of hormesis, where sort of subjecting the body to a little bit of stress then can protect against bigger stresses, right? And even vaccines work sort of the same way. Like you give your body a little bit of the infectious stuff in order to prevent getting really sick from an infection. So it's sort of like things like heated yoga or even just heat exposure on its own are thought to have the same sort of effect where they stress the body out in a way that then can build up its tolerance and resilience to other stressors. And the really cool thing is that even if you give one type of stress, like going to like a hot yoga class, and it's really hard in the moment and it's very stressful, it's kind of stressful for your body, and maybe you're like a little stressed out in your mind, like, am I doing it right? I can't do that yet, or whatever. Um, it sort of builds your ability to handle other stressors, like not just being able to get better at, going to hot yoga and enjoying it more, but also dealing with the stress of life better. And, we can even find that at a molecular level, which is, since I'm a big nerd, I get really interested in that.
So you can see humans able to manage stress better. So would you say then those cortisol spikes do not happen when they're
So
receiving the benefits of heated yoga or heat? in general?
Yes. So I think so. We all need a little bit of cortisol because cortisol in itself is not bad. It kind of is a stress hormone that then sort of helps your body, you know, deal with stress. However, what happens is that if you keep having high levels of cortisol over time, then your body gets burnt out. So then when you get future stress, you actually can't make an appropriate cortisol response. And it's not just that you can't make it, it's that the timing of it gets screwy. So like there's supposed to be like this circadian rhythm of cortisol production. Um, and so it's a little more complicated than just like high levels or low levels, but it's almost like you're now like there's a natural rhythm of how it's supposed to go. And when people get really stressed, either they're like constantly high or they're burnt out and constantly low. So I think it's not that heated yoga necessarily gets rid of the cortisol, but it restores that natural rhythm. And there's probably other things that the hot yoga does too. Like it probably regulates your inflammatory response, which is your immune system's response to stress, among other things. Like ideally, your immune system is responding to infection and then it calms down again. But we know that when our brains are stressed and our bodies get stressed, our immune system thinks that we're under attack and it goes on full alert. And if there's nothing actually to attack, it even can start attacking our own bodies. And that can lead to things like autoimmunity. And a lot of the time, in things like depression, we see that there's a heightened inflammatory response. And sometimes depression and anxiety go together, and people feel really afraid. And we know that that fear response also can like heighten your inflammatory response and up your sympathetic nervous system tone. And over time, that can lead to further disorders like cardiovascular disease and, just all this bad stuff. So anything that can sort of build our tolerance and resilience to stress is good. And, hot yoga is just amazing because it works on so many levels to do just that.
That's so helpful to understand. Thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about the Mass General Depression Clinic?
Simi and I both work at the Depression Clinical and Research Program at Mass General. Simi is a psychiatrist. I'm a psychologist, and it's an interesting program because it mixes clinical work and clinical research all at the same time. And it is a bunch of people interested in both of those things. Simi, what else? Do you have anything else you would add?
I like the freedom, like the intellectual freedom they give us there. So like Marion could do like a study on hot yoga, and I can do a study on like putting people into a medical grade sauna. So even though it's like so prestigious and there's so many wonderful people, super smart people to work with. Like they're very open-minded, which is, I feel like a rare combination of something I wasn't necessarily expecting when I first joined the program. Then I met Marin and I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
And
I was so happy when I heard about her study.
We walked by my office. She like knocks on the door and she was like, hey, are you studying hot yoga? And I was like, oh yeah, nice to meet you. And then she said, I did my dissertation on like cells and fever. And I was like, it just was like, and that was like the moment that, and we added blood work onto the study that I was doing for my K award, which is like kind of the research grant you get when it's like you get mentored to become an independent investigator. And so we added blood markers on to that study because of Simi's expertise.
in that study, can you talk a little bit more about exactly what were you testing and what were some of the key findings in that study?
The first study we did was an open label study. We just sent everybody to Bikram yoga to see if it worked and if it was safe and feasible. And it worked, and people don't go as much as that you ask them to go. People are going basically like 1.5 times a week, even though we ask for at least two, and we're still getting antidepressant effects. That's like the take home of all these studies. And the more you go, the better you get is basically also what I think is emerging. But the second study, it was a randomized control trial. So 80 people with clinical levels of depression. They were both basically like moderate to severe levels of depression. We screened them and then we sent them to either do community Bikram yoga, or they did a wait list and then did the community Bikram yoga, and they had a blinded rater. So somebody who didn't know which condition they were in was giving them gold standard depression scales. and we tracked all their data, and we basically found that it worked. They went on average 10.4 times over 8 weeks. So they're going a little over once a week. Again, we asked them to go at least twice a week.
Right. But even with
So,
less than twice a week, a little less than twice a week, practicing hot yoga, you saw results.
right. So I'll give you an example. So the groups were clinically significant. They were different, statistically significance for the group that went to the yoga. They got better, much more so than the waitlist group. And then if you look at sort of rates of like response and remission, 60% of the group in yoga had a response, meaning their symptoms were reduced by at least 50%,
Wow.
whereas 6.3% in the waitlist group had a response.
Yeah. Amazing difference. Wow. Wow.
And the effect size was big as well. It was over 1. So like effect size is sort of like the difference between the waitlist and the active group. It's like the magnitude or the signal. And a small effect is 0.3, a medium effect is 0.5, and a large effect is 0.8 or bigger. And I think our effect size was 1.04 around
wow.
there. So it was a large effect size.
Wow. Very large.
Yep. So it's
Incredible.
working, and it's interesting that it's working when people aren't going as often as we wanted them to go,
Yeah.
which sort of makes sense just because it does seem like such a potent, like we all know when you walk out of there, you're shifted.
You've
It's
been
not just a small shift.
right, right. Yeah. You don't walk away unaware of feeling different. So those were some of the primary outcomes. Were there secondary outcomes as well?
There were. Anxiety went down, quality of life improved, perceived stress went down, which matches what we were talking about, the cortisol and reactors to stress. The other measure of depression also went down. So we included 2 measures of depression just to be extra careful. Energy levels went up and fatigue went down. Emotional well-being improved. Yeah, I think social functioning actually improved. Revitalization went up, tranquility went up, and also physical exhaustion went down.
Wow.
Positive engagement trended upwards. So my guess about social functioning is like if you're, again, I don't know exactly what the question said, but social functioning, I don't know, Simi, it's like, how do you engage with other people? Do you feel comfortable with
Yeah.
yourself? Are you avoiding people? Right? If you're feeling bad and depressed and anxious, we all know this, you withdraw. I'm going to
Right,
watch Netflix. If I'm not feeling great about myself, I'm not
right.
going to the big girls' dinner to just sit there and mope.
No,
I'm not feeling full of energy and wanting to connect. I'm going to hide.
you stay on the couch. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think that would be it. I know sometimes people, especially measured on the inventory of depressive symptoms too, but like the way you think people are perceiving you, like feeling like you're being criticized or like just being really sensitive if someone says something, you just take it completely the wrong way and want to, or like you're irritable. Yeah, it's like probably sort of feeling more connected and more wanting to be around people and not taking everything so personally.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, from a personal experience standpoint, I'll say less reactive. And,
Yeah.
and something you said, Marin, earlier when you were describing your own sort of feelings around the difference after hot yoga, what came up for me was non-attachment. We're not so attached to every outcome or clinging to something has to be a certain way. There's an easefulness that comes after you practice hot yoga with some consistency. And this is my own personal experience, having struggled with anxiety myself, that it just enables or unleashes this level of centeredness, easefulness, peacefulness that we kind of can more easily take the winds of change and those winds coming at us head on, and bend and flex a little more versus be brittle and snap or so attached to it being the way we think it ought to be or should be or want it to be. It
Totally
just
agree.
some flexibility and calmness.
Well, it's funny because it's almost like Simi, the benefits she's talking about like mirror the inside, the molecules and the cells mirror
Yeah.
the
Like we
outside.
know, like, yeah, like even at a cellular level, we know that heat makes things more fluid and less likely to crack and break. Yeah,
Well,
it's totally true. Mm.
I was
And then,
chatting with our team the other day about this because I think we all aspire for this, but it's easier said than done. But in yoga, when you think about like a tree pose, I think everybody kind of universally knows tree pose, right? Where we balance the inside of our foot in our ankle or calf or upper thigh and stand there and balance on one leg. But, if you can raise your arm up and your arms up overhead and sort of bend with the winds of change and the curve balls or whatever might come at you, through you, around you, and flex versus being brittle and topple over, and more take in the essence of a tree that's bendy and flexes when it's a windstorm. That's what we all aspire to. And yoga, these are metaphors for lessons off the mat in yoga. And I love that tree pose lesson because it's very personal to me, having been one of those people that was overly attached to outcomes, struggled with anxiety and a lot of stress in my life, and yoga has really helped change that, and hot yoga in particular, for sure. With regular practice, and I practice much more than one time a week, so it's been dramatic for me personally. Simi, could you talk a little bit, because in an earlier conversation that we had informally, I was really struck with the history of heat therapy, particularly going all the way back to the 1800s. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yes, yes. So it actually goes back a lot further than that, but so like since antiquity, people have been doing like hot baths, like the Roman baths, right? They would do hot and then warm and then cold, or even in Eastern modalities, they would do thermal exposures, and Native Americans had sweat lodges. So like these types of exposures to heat have been practiced for a really long time. But then in like the after the in the modern era, we lost a lot of that. And it was in the late 1800s that people started to think about things like heat as being helpful. And it was actually this psychiatrist who was working in an asylum, um, and he had a patient, like this woman who was really psychotic, and she got a high fever. And after the fever resolved, her symptoms went away. And he was struck by that, and he started trying to give fevers to people who were sick to see if it would help. And amazingly, it did. Now, the way that he was inducing a fever was by injecting malaria, which is, has some issues with it because some people would get sick and die. But regardless, he got the Nobel Prize for this work because so many people did get better. And after that, like fever therapy became a thing, and to try to avoid the problems of injecting people with bacteria and malaria and stuff like that, they started doing heat exposure again, only this time in a more regulated way with like a medical grade sauna. And that lasted up for maybe 30 or 40 years, up to the 50s and 60s. And the reason that we don't still do it and we don't know as much about it now is because of the invention of pharmaceutical drugs. So like around the 50s, we started having the first mental health drugs like antidepressants and antipsychotics and anti-anxiolytics. And pharmaceutical companies started springing up. And, you could make a ton of pills and distribute them to people. And that business model didn't fit in as well with doing therapies like asana therapy. And so it really like sort of disappeared for a long time. And it wasn't until people like Marin and other researchers like Chuck Raison who started thinking, okay, maybe it's time to revisit these ancient practices, and they're just as effective as they were 1,000 years ago. And so, one of the struggles is sort of figuring out, well, we're living in a society where it's a lot easier sometimes to take a pill than go to yoga class. And for some people, definitely medication, is really helpful.
Sure.
Um, But we don't know if maybe going to a yoga class would be just as helpful. And Marin's research is saying, well, yeah, it is.
We did 2 case reports on this of women very severely depressed, both on antidepressants in aggressive treatment, and they added hot yoga, and their depression went away, both of them.
Wow.
And they were functioning, they were treated, but they weren't doing great. And those are 2 people that probably, like, at that point, they weren't going to go off their antidepressants. They were just like, they got all the way there.
I wanted to ask a question about the heat being added to yoga specifically, or are there similar findings when heat is added to other workouts or exercises? So we're talking a lot about heat therapy in the past and heat. Is it a combination of heat and yoga, or if it's heated, Pilates or heated, whatever, functional movement of some sort?
So one, I would say we're doing a study right now where we're doing Bikram with and without the heat. So that's going to isolate the heat.
Yeah.
Simi, I want to turn you to like Chuck's Raison's work. He did a study of heat by itself. You bring people up to 101.3 with major depressive disorder off antidepressants, which is another kind of tangent, but off antidepressants. And he did a believable sham. And it was in people, I think the groups were, it was like 30 people total that went into the device. It's a medical grade hyperthermia device from Germany. And the believable sham was like actually a low heat. It turned into a low heat kind of control. And his effect size after a week was over 2.
Which is humongous.
Over 2. And the group in the sham, 71.4% of them thought they got the active treatment because it was warm. So it controlled for placebo effects in a lot of people. And the effect size was so huge. And it's one treatment and it lasted for 6 weeks. Simi is doing a follow-up to that. So Simi can tell you more about it.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically we're trying to repeat that study, but I wanted to look more at some of the molecular mechanisms. And I like to test the device and I set up the protocol, so I got in it to see. And it's definitely not the same as having a yoga class or a heated yoga class. But there is something about it that feels very integrating to the self. And I don't know how to explain that better at the moment. But there's something about it that feels very like not just detoxifying and it's definitely not the same as like doing a workout in the heat. And I don't know, so one of the questions is, so when people are in this medical grade sauna, they actually can't do anything else but just lie there. And so I'm wondering if like part of the antidepressant effect might be due to just being fully in your body, nowhere else to go, just got to be there. And that part feels similar to me as what I experience in yoga, but different from when I'm exercising and in a hot environment, because then I'm like, okay, I have to make this mile or whatever it is, right? So, so I think there's definitely some things that will be similar and some things that will be different. And we know that some of the molecular markers of people exercising in the heat are the same. So when you exercise in the heat, one of these little immune markers in your blood called IL-6 goes up. And it goes up no matter what type of exercise you're doing, whether it's, yoga or lying in the or just with the heat exposure itself. However, what I'm expecting is that there are going to be a lot of differences as well. And, that's one of the things that's going to be so exciting to find out.
Yeah.
And there's a study that did Bikram yoga in and out of the heat and looked at these markers she's talking about. And the markers didn't go up if you weren't in the heated room.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So we would like to study that as well in a depressed population, because they showed it in a non-depressed population.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I would imagine that, so, the movement combined with the heat, these yoga postures combined with the heat, that's, the heat has one impact, which you talked about for, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And then there's the movement with the heat. In yoga, we also right? At CorePower Yoga, we teach coordinating breath to movement as well. So, Simi, you were talking about being in your body. So, when you're moving from posture to posture, or you're fully exploring into a posture, you're coordinating your breath in your movement together, and we cue that. That is something that we also learn to take off the mat, because, right, when we're stressed, what do? Fight or flight, hold our breath. We don't breathe. Or if we do breathe, it's very shallow breathing. Learning to breathe and to be in our body and to really take those deep breaths and inhale and exhale, and even out our breathing, even this combined with the heat and the movement, I have to believe has an exponentially positive effect.
I believe that's true. I think it's synergistic, right? It's like, we know that yoga postures by themselves, you can look in the literature and find the benefits over and over and over again on different systems. And like, that's indisputable.
Right.
And then you've got this like sort of growing body of literature, and sort of what Simi's talking about with the cells and heat. And, so there's no way that combining those two things doesn't like synergize and catalyze the benefits. All our scale, like the human body is so complicated. Our scales only capture like a small little bit of the human experience. So it's like, in the one hand, these standard depression scales are really helpful because like the medical world listens, and you can publish them in these journals, and like the doctors listen, And then on the other hand, you're like, it's such a small sliver of what the benefits actually are.
Right. We hear such wide-ranging benefits from our students. It does connect us more holistically, mind, body, and spirit. I believe that, and makes us more self-aware, more present, and tuned in to what we're thinking and feeling. So we're less likely to mindlessly go reach for some instant or momentary salve that doesn't work anyway. So anyways, where do you go from here? What's next?
Simi, go ahead. What you're...
Yeah, so a few things going on. One is this, again, looking at heat for patients who have long COVID symptoms, because there's some evidence that it might be really helpful. And there's so many people who are having long COVID symptoms right now. The other is, in my wheelhouse, is like really digging into some of these mechanisms and see if we can find ways, or like markers or other like physiological markers, even like temperature, heart rate, things like that then we can use to sort of say, okay, well, you should definitely go to the high heat yoga, and you should not do the high heat yoga, but you do low heat, or, or you should just start with the whole body hyperthermia and then add in movement as you can. So like sort of being able to personalize and actually recommend different things to people, so they don't have to go through and sort of be doing all these trials, on their own, and we can actually give guidance, because right now there's not really a way to guide people towards the treatments that will work the best for them.
Well, I just think this is incredible work you're doing, and I'm so excited to be partnered with you and hopefully hearing more and more about your research. And thank you both, Simi and Maren, for joining us for CorePower Yoga Conversation. This has been just so inspiring and informative and affirming. What we hear from our students every day, that you're actually trying to research and prove out that hot yoga really can have these incredible mental health benefits. And I certainly think so, and it sounds like both of you do too.
Thank you so much for all you're doing and for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And you guys are so amazing.
Yeah, you're doing awesome things. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay.